morning and welcome to the April edition of Housing Our Future webinar series. My name is Kristen Baker. I'm the Executive Director of LISC Greater Cincinnati, and we are so happy today to have Mayor Aftab Pureval and the team from the city's Department of City Planning and Engagement here to share a little more information about the Connected Communities Initiative. So the mayor is held up in another meeting, so he'll be here very soon. And in the meantime, I'm happy to introduce Catherine Keogh-Jers, who is the director of the Department of City Planning and Engagement, who is going to step us through a little bit of background information about connected communities and resources that are available to you right now to take a look and explore. So, and I should mention too, if you have questions, we're happy to field your questions. Please use the chat box to send those questions to us. We'll do our best to get to as many of those questions as we can. This webinar is also being recorded, so it will be available on LISC's website later next week, as are all of our webinars from the last 2 years. Those are available for your viewing at any time through our website. We'll drop the link in the chat shortly. Catherine?
Thank you, Kristen. Good morning, everyone. I'm Catherine Keogh-Jers. I'm the Director of the Department of City Planning and Engagement here at the City of Cincinnati, and we're really excited to join you on this very rainy Thursday. I'm looking out my window and I'm feeling very grateful that we have technology here to help us so that we're not all out and about in this morning. So thanks for joining us. We're really excited to talk to you about connected communities this morning, and the mayor's going to join us soon to go through really a lot of excellent information for you today. But while we were waiting his arrival, we thought that what we might want to do is take you through our website. Our staff here, I just cannot say enough about the excellent work that this staff has done to create a really wonderful, informative, and engaging website that includes just a ton of great information about connected communities, why it's being proposed, all of the work that we've gone through to engage people, to do research on what other cities are doing, to understand better what sort of like I guess educational researchers are doing on these topics, and to really try to explain some of the policy proposals in a way that it really kind of brings it down to help everybody better understand it. And so I'm going to ask Andrew Halt, who's a senior city planner in our office and who is the project manager for Connected Communities, to just walk us through for a moment and show us some of the resources that are available to you on our website. Hopefully you've been there already, but if you haven't, we'd really like to introduce it to you now. So Andrew.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you all for being here today. As Catherine said, we're very excited to share this with you. So I'm going to share my screen right now for our Connect Communities website. Is that, Catherine, give me a thumbs up if that looks good? You can see it? Great. All right. So this is our website. So we built this entirely in-house using the ArcGIS Experience Builder web tool, which has been awesome, and it has really, I think, leveled up our website game. And so here on our opening page, you just see, so welcome to Connect Communities, and then a great launch video that the mayor's office made about really why we are doing Connect Communities. But I would really like to highlight this Explore tab. So this tab is what really explains the policies, and we know that these can be very wonky and very difficult to understand, and even hard for us sometimes because it gets very detailed. And so this is the goal of this, is to really show what these policies look like in our neighborhoods and how the impact really is felt. And so at the bottom here, we have everything else that the city is doing with regard to housing. So please take a look there, and there's links to describing things like accessory dwelling units and what that is. But then to find about our zoning changes, you can click here, and it opens up to a new page. And here we have an extensive description of what is Connected Communities, and then what we're doing as part of it. So for this introduction about what is Connected Communities here, and then talking about really the why, and then what has led up to this. But then if you go back, you can navigate at the top here to go back between these individual what we're calling story maps, and then the overall main menu here. And then we go through Cincinnati's housing history, the history of zoning in Cincinnati specifically, and some of the issues that we've come across. And then you can go explore specifically the different policy areas. So for like middle housing, you can go scroll through here and then really understand like what is middle housing. And then we have these great graphics that we made in-house here of just like what a before and after of a housing unit looks like. So this would be a duplex, and then we have these little characters that we made as well to really explain like how this impacts everyday Cincinnatians. So we have a ton of awesome information here. We got maps, graphics. We spent months making this. We had a lot of fun with it, and we really hope that this is something that's useful for everyone. And then if you scroll all the way down, going here, we have all data from our engagement about what Cincinnatians thought about these policies when we engaged with everybody. We have the recommendation as well about where we're focusing this, and the mayor will get into that specifically. And then at the very bottom, we have a survey for people to provide feedback about what they think about the policies. And we have that for each of these policy areas. So that's the website. Definitely check it out for the policies. We also have a couple different tabs here. We have a map tab where our team built a tool where you can see exactly how the policies affect each parcel. So you can type in your address here. So I can do City Hall, 801 Plum Street, and then it zooms right in, and then you can see exactly how the policies affect this parcel. So it says exactly where what connected community zones this parcel is, and then some additional information about what other existing regulations apply, and then just saying, all right, what policy for middle housing apply here, what from reducing regulatory barriers to density and height, and as well as parking. So this is a great tool for you to find out like exactly how these policies affect your home, and then you can go back to see the full view here. We also have individual posters for neighborhoods that we were getting a lot of questions on, exactly like on a neighborhood scale, how the policies affect them. So we have these neighborhood posters, and you can go click here and see just on a more higher level, not by parcel, but a higher level of how the policies affect different neighborhoods in these different areas. So for middle housing, so this yellow area here, this is where middle housing will now be allowed. And then for we also cover parking, row houses, and looking at height and density. So this is a good tool for if people just want to understand like what the impact in their neighborhood is, they can see that here. And then finally, we have our Engage tab, where we talk about events and different all of our different engagement that we are having in the future and have had in the past. And so we continuously update this. And then we also have a videos tab where we have our virtual meeting recorded, as well as an informational presentation the mayor made to City Planning Commission last month. And actually, finally, we have our FAQ page where we have all of our bunch of questions that we have been getting from before Connect Community started, and then since engagement. And we also are going to update this page over the coming weeks here. So that's a rundown of our website. Happy to answer any questions about that. If there's any tools that people are looking for, just how to navigate.
Andrew, that was fantastic. Thank you so much for doing that. And thank you for all of the great work that's been put into this. I again want to make people understand this work was all done in-house. This was all done by city staff. We did not hire any consultants to do this. This is also not their only job. They are also, doing the everyday work of being a city planner. So this has been just an enormous lift from this department. I'm so proud of the work that they've done. Kristen asked me to just chat for a moment about some of the engagement that we've done. I think Andrew pointed out to you the tab on our website where there is a pretty detailed account of our engagement strategy. We really have been engaging on this. I think the mayor will probably touch on this as well, so I don't want to get too much into it, but we have been engaging on this for about the past 2 years, starting with Councilmember Harris's Housing Summit from 2022, which I know a lot of you were a part of, and I want to say thank you to you for that, and continuing up until our most recent Housing Summit, which was just held last month. Many of you participated in that as well, so I want to say thank you to you for that. But just so that you know that there will be a full engagement report that we're working on right now that is detailing all of really the summary of all of that engagement. and with raw data as well. So I know that will be interesting to a lot of you. We are working on just sort of perfecting it right now. So please have a little bit of patience with us as we get that available to you. And then as Andrew mentioned on our FAQs page, we have been getting questions from a lot of you about some details about connected communities, and we're doing the best that we can to respond to those. We'll be updating the FAQ page soon as well. And I see that the mayor has joined us. Welcome, Mayor.
Morning, guys. How are you all?
Great. How are you doing?
Doing well. Yeah.
Good. Kristen or Liz, do you want me to kick it back over to you, or would you just like the mayor to get right to it?
I think we can just let Mayor Pureval have the floor. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to your presentation.
Great. I'm going to start sharing my screen. Here we go. All right. Did I do that right? Kristen, can you guys see the slide deck?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. Kristen and Lisk and the entire group here today, thanks so much for giving us some time to talk through connected communities. I know that I just addressed you all and probably touched on some of this during our meeting at the United Way, but so excited to keep kind of running through the deck and giving you a sense of what we're working on here. This is just a kind of heads up on what we're talking about today. Why connected communities? We're going to really talk about the last 2 years of community engagement, hearing from Cincinnatians about what they want, and specifically also about what they very much do not want. We'll talk about the policy recommendations that we're discussing, both the actual tool for reform and then also where we're applying that tool, and then the timeline for the rest of the conversations that we'll be having moving forward. We often talk about connected communities in a very grandiose way. But at the end of the day, connected communities is really about land use and zoning reform. And that is important because right now, our laws and zoning code and systems are set in a way that is resulting in not only inequitable conclusions, but also is unfortunately pushing a lot of people out of our region and cities specifically because of a lack of access to housing. And we oftentimes talk about these bureaucratic conversations, these technical conversations, and lose track of the fact that this is really about our people. This is about current Cincinnatians. This is about future Cincinnatians, and creating a city where people want to live, where they can afford to live, enjoy living in, and maybe most importantly, someplace where they can age in place. Unfortunately, all of those things are a challenge right now for Cincinnatians because home prices are exploding, unfortunately. Housing construction is lagging, and our zoning code is actually capping the supply of housing rather than empowering us to create more housing, to drive down those home prices and make more affordable units available to folks. This is just some of what we're talking about when we talk about the various aspects of this housing challenge that we're facing. Home prices are just going through the roof. You can see the increase over the past 8 years or so. And at the same time, our incomes are basically flat. So the cost of living is going through the roof because home prices and housing is usually people's number one expense per month. And at the same time, we're not creating enough housing. So here's the really good news. Over the last 10 years, our population has grown. We're one of the few Midwestern cities that is seeing a population growth over the past 10 years. The pandemic hasn't knocked us off that path. But you would expect our housing production to at least keep pace with that population, if not stay flat. It's actually just the opposite, the worst case scenario, where our population is going up and our housing is actually going down. We're actually losing housing because of the age of our houses and the age of our city. And so that's creating a massive problem, which is boosting rents, which is boosting property values, boosting taxes to, inaccessible levels, partly because we just don't have enough supply and housing. Housing construction is lagging. We know that, but when we look at our peer cities, we are really, really far behind. let alone Nashville and the Charlottes and the Dallases of the world. We're behind Columbus. We're behind Kansas City. We're behind Dayton, Ohio. I mean, so this is real. This housing construction, housing preservation problem is a massive part of why it's so expensive to live in our community right now. The number of new housing units over the last 6 years after hearings is 564. The fact that we're focused on these hearings is important because hearings put in a level of uncertainty, hearings put in a delay, all of that costs more money. And so because our zoning code is not congruent with the kinds of housing that we want to create in order to alleviate these burdens on our citizens, when 564 housing projects have to go through a hearing, that means that our current laws are inconsistent with the kinds of housing that we're trying to create. And what's worse is those 564 hearings cause delays, which increases costs, which are then passed down to the renter or to the homeowner. So, again, it's another instance of not being able to create housing in an affordable, efficient, and quick way. A lot of the times we hear from communities about worried about look and feel of a neighborhood. This is an example of what we're talking about with respect to connected communities. You guys are all housing experts, so I don't necessarily need to go into some of these details in defining required setback, et cetera. But this is basically the gray box of what you can build in Cincinnati based on our zoning code. There's the required setbacks, the permitted heights, the maximum building size. So right now, this is a fictional single family community in Cincinnati. That's a single family home. So the density on this product is one family. A majority of Cincinnati is designated single family exclusive. So that means all of middle housing, almost all of middle housing is illegal in the majority of Cincinnati, which of course creates more of a supply issue. To alleviate that, pursuing connected communities, we could take the same gray box, the same setbacks and heights, and now we can have 2 families, doubling the amount of housing on that single lot. We can have 3 families also within the gray box. And to get really crazy, 4 families, which are, again, illegal in single family homes. But the fundamental point here from this entire introduction is when supply doesn't equal demand, prices go up. And right now we have an incredible high demand with the new residents in our city and a shrinking supply with the lack of housing. And of course, unfortunately, our prices are going up. This doesn't just affect prices, though. This also affects how a community evolves, how displacement happens. This is another fictional neighborhood where you've got low and moderate income folks living. You've got a vacant lot there. There are no high income folks living here. When it's incredibly hard to build housing in a city like ours, that vacant lot just sits there. And because there's no supply and because there's no competition, these landlords can then increase rents. And so when they increase rents, unfortunately, that pushes out the low and moderate income folks, and the high income people come in and buy up those spaces. But if we're able to relax these restrictions, encourage more housing creation in that vacant lot, we can more equitably balance the various incomes, the diverse incomes of each neighborhood. Right now, that's incredibly difficult to do because of the lack of housing development in our city. The research is very clear on this. Building more housing stabilizes rents. Look at Minneapolis. Minneapolis got rid of single family housing zoning a few years ago. And as a result, their increase in homes went up 8% and their rent growth only went up 3%. Look at the United States average, 3% in homes, 23% in median rent increases. We are above that. That's embarrassing. It's frustrating. It has to end, and we have to change that. But what is most frustrating is the negative 3% in housing, in house creation. I mean, if these numbers stay where they are, folks, we are going to have a city where normal people cannot afford to live. So the status quo, going down the same path, kicking the can down the road, saying, oh, we should have zoning change someday, or, you can do zoning change in that neighborhood, but not in my neighborhood. We can't do that anymore. I'm sorry. I've heard the arguments. I hear people who are of good faith, who have significant and legitimate disagreements, but the status quo can't hold because of this graph. And I know we all care about the future of our city. I know we all care about the diversity of our city and who lives here. But if we don't change course, then only very few people will be able to afford to live here. And that will be at the cost of the future of our great city. Again, this just does a deep dive into Minneapolis rent growth. As I mentioned, they did significant zoning change 2 years ago. I think you can hear the passion in my voice, but these articles, these headlines, both at the local and national level, are incredibly infuriating. And the pain that they represent for our community is overwhelming. And we were elected to change that. And while this is hard, that's exactly what we're trying to do. So in addition to housing creation, the other part of our zoning code is that it is creating systemic inequity, either by design or not, I'm not sure. But what is true is because we have made illegal single family zoning, or excuse me, because our majority of our city is single family zoning, and it is illegal to build anything else. What we are saying is in a majority of our city, you cannot live in this neighborhood unless you can afford the most expensive type of housing, single family housing. And so, of course, over generations, our poverty has been concentrated and our city is incredibly segregated. That's just true. Now, if we change zoning, that's not going to change tomorrow. It's going to take a long time. But that's what happens when you change systems. It is iterative change, but in order to deconcentrate our poverty and desegregate our city, we have to take that first step to change the systems. This just gives you, some data to back up those statements. There's a lot of reasons why the zoning code is artificially capping supply. We've talked a lot about density and single family housing, which is at the end. Parking does an extraordinary amount to take up land that could be used for parking, or excuse me, for housing or for economic development. The size of units is often inefficient in housing products. And then, obviously all of the rules around how high a building can be, how far apart the building should be with respect to other buildings and other and the street. And the result of this antiquated zoning code is higher rents, segregation, not enough vibrancy in our neighborhood business districts, not enough customers for our local businesses. We have pavement everywhere because we're car dependent, and that has really, really challenging impacts on our climate. Zoning code is hard. Previous administrations have tried, zoning code reform is hard. Previous administrations have tried to do this and unfortunately not been able to succeed. We tried to learn from those previous iterations, not just on the policy, but actually probably more importantly on how we engaged with the community. This is really hard because as opposed to this group, the everyday citizen doesn't necessarily know the intricacies of zoning code and land use. Frankly, when I first started this process, I didn't know either. And so in addition to hearing from Cincinnatians, we were also educating at the same time, which is really challenging. And that education and community engagement didn't just start, it started 2 years ago in 2022. Councilmember Harris really kicked us off with his housing summit in June June 11th in East Price Hill. Over that summer, we engaged with professional stakeholders, subject matter experts. They were, housing advocates. They were housing, construction folks. We talked to zoning experts. We talked to housing advocates and activists. We talked to the development community. And then in 2023, we went out to the community and asked people what they wanted through various community events. The numbers are pretty impactful. We were able to do 8 events, 236 attendees. We had a survey with 1,200 responses. We just had another housing summit that Councilmember Harris led that was devoted entirely to connected communities with 200 plus attendees. We have had an interactive booth at the Neighborhood Summit. We will also have a booth at the Neighborhood Summit. And in addition, I'll be on stage talking through the connected communities. And so will, I believe, other council members. 40 neighborhoods have been represented. And of course, as I mentioned, we didn't just talk to the community, we also talked to subject matter experts. So let's get into what we're actually talking about here. So the tools of reform are sixfold. Middle housing, I've talked a lot about that so far. Reducing regulatory barriers, talking about density, height, setback, parking, the impact of mandatory parking. I want to be very clear, we are not prohibiting parking development. We are just saying it's not mandatory with each development, or we're reforming that. Prioritizing affordable development and incentivizing it. Really thinking creatively about human scale development. What is the look and feel of a neighborhood? That is important to us. And then process improvements to make the whole thing more efficient. The fundamental question is, if those are the tools, well, where are you going to put them there? We like to think about these things at a systems level. And so, I think the neighborhood business districts make a lot of sense, because connected communities, of course, is about housing, but it's also about economic development. It's also about having the backs of our small businesses, particularly in the pandemic when work from home is so prevalent. Our small businesses are struggling. Our neighborhood coffee shops and restaurants and bars and entertainment areas, particularly 9 to 5, is feeling some pain. And so we want to incentivize people to live closer to their neighborhood business districts, because we think not only will that create more access to housing, but it will also mean that there's more customers for those local businesses, neighborhood business districts. So that's why we're focusing on NBDs. And then when we talk about systems, I'm really excited that issue 7 passed, that SORTA is going to be finally rolling out bus rapid transit, which could be transformational for Cincinnati. But we are still a Midwest city, and we are still slavishly committed to our automobiles. And so bus rapid transit, I think, has the potential to be a game changer. But the city, frankly, doesn't have enough resources to move the market. So how do we incentivize the market to invest into disinvested neighborhoods? Well, our idea is to pair our systems reform of zoning with the systems reform of bus rapid transit and pair them together. And that's why we're focused on major transit corridors. By making sure that bus rapid transit stops, which are more than just a bench and a sign, they're actually like stops, physical brick and mortar stops. By encouraging those to be placed in disinvested neighborhood business districts and neighborhoods, we can pair our zoning code changes to incentivize and increase more investment in and around those stops, and also encourage more people to take public transportation. It's a long-term strategy, but I think if our zoning code reforms take place at the same time as our bus rapid transit reforms, we could have a recipe for equitable growth moving forward, particularly in those disinvested communities. And then you'll see from the results of the feedback that we got that citywide was not necessarily something that people wanted the zoning code to change. And so we really tried to be very intentional and specific about where we were putting it. And only a couple of cases will zoning code change citywide, and I'll talk about those specifically. These are the neighborhood business districts. Not all 52 neighborhoods have a neighborhood business district, but as you can see, it's relatively spread out throughout our city. This is a neighborhood business district with a quarter-mile buffer. Quarter-mile is roughly a 5-minute walk. These are the major corridors. I was talking about bus rapid transit. That's tier 1 in the, I guess that's drab green. I'm not sure what color that is. And then the Houday orange for the east-west. Those are 24/7 routes. They're not bus rapid transit, but this is a meaningful investment by SORTA, and we're trying to pair our zoning code to support and to incentivize the use of our public transportation. This is a half mile, which is a 10-minute walk from our BRT. For the buffer around our major transit corridors, the 24/7 east-west, we're just doing block face, which means right on the street. There's no real buffer there. And when we combine the neighborhood business districts and the major corridors, this is the map of what we're talking about, where we're trying to be very intentional about putting our reforms. And I've talked about why. You know, the policy was created in a collaborative process. The first thing that our administration did was look at the research. What are the subject matter experts saying? What are the intellectuals and the academics saying? What are the research papers saying? Then we looked at what other cities are doing. I've talked about Minneapolis a little bit. Other cities have taken various approaches to zoning. And then finally, what did Cincinnatians think? This is a grid of how we're going to talk about the reforms, both what the tool is that's reforming and then where it's going to go. So the first is middle housing. I'm confident all of you know about middle housing. Right now, middle housing is largely illegal in the city of Cincinnati. We think middle housing is critically important because it naturally creates more affordability. It creates more of an economically sustainable neighborhood by bringing more people in and around our neighborhood business district. You know, obviously reducing emissions, barriers to economic integration, because you have different housing options at different price points in the same neighborhood. You know, I think previous administrations, well, let me just talk about myself. One of the first questions I got when we announced this was, does this mean, and these are their words, not mine, does this mean poor people will be living in, you know, Hyde Park, Mount Lookout, Oakley? And the answer is yes. We need more housing options at different price points all around the city. There are no neighborhoods for affordable housing, and there are no neighborhoods that shouldn't have affordable housing. There are just neighborhoods. And so if you don't want a poor person, in your words, living next to you, you know, that's a personal problem that you're going to have to figure out. So the middle housing engagement, you know, how do you feel about middle housing from the community? It's really, really positive. You know, as you can see, the green is wanted, the yellow is wanted with changes. You know, I think, and they want it in both transit corridors and neighborhood business districts. What I was really excited about was row homes. You know, we are excited about row homes because row homes are a perfect way and a perfect tool for us to really address the shocking disparity between white home ownership and black home ownership. Row homes are a perfect product for a first-time home buyer to get access to and to start their home ownership, you know, experience, building that credit, building that equity. And right now, unfortunately, row homes are really, really hard to build because they are inconsistent with our zoning code. Row homes are exciting because both the public survey really likes them, and row homes were kind of the top item for our professional stakeholders. So that's a flashing green light for us. This is our suggestion for middle housing. 2, 3, 4 family units permitted within a quarter mile of a neighborhood business district. 2, 3, 4 family units permitted along major corridors. And we're going to permit row homes by right in SF2. So that is a single family zone, but the number is the size of the unit. And so SF2 is one of our smaller size single family home zones. And so we think it will fit in with the look and feel of that community. You can imagine a skinny row home standing alone in the middle of a neighborhood with larger lot sizes. That would look a little silly. SF2, we think, is the sweet spot. And as you can see from the map, it really does expand the opportunities for row homes to be built in our city. Regulatory barriers, we're talking here about density, height, and setbacks. You know, it's again, the research is very clear. Regulatory barriers, restrictive regulatory barriers, create increases in rent, increases in home prices, and of course, we've talked about segregation and concentrations of poverty. This is what people think in Cincinnati. Green is eliminate, yellow is relax. You know, again, there's some support of this in near transit and neighborhood business districts. There's some support in multifamily zones. The support in single family zones and citywide starts to get a little less positive. With respect to setbacks, there was 61% near transit and NBDs, and then the rest are below 50% for multifamily, single family, and citywide. And then for height, again, 67% top line. You guys can do the math. The support really drops off in single family zones and citywide. But density is important. I mean, this is a tool that we need to avail ourselves in order to address the inequities that we're seeing both in the economic development realm and also the housing realm. This is a building in one of our neighborhood business districts. As you can see, that looks like there's housing on top. Looks like there's a small business on the bottom. With our current zoning code, we could put 2 units in here, 2,400 square feet per unit. If we change some of these restrictions, we could fit 6 units in, and each unit would be 800 square feet. So there's opportunities to really take a look at these restrictive zoning rules and make sure that they're actually creating the kind of city that we want to live in. And we think they're not. And so we're going to be making these recommendations: no density restrictions in neighborhood business districts, no change to form regulations, however, no density restrictions, and a 1-story height bonus along major corridors. This excludes single family zones because, going back to the public survey, the community did not support that. And again, going back to the survey, the community did not support a citywide proposal on height, setback, or density. Parking. Okay, so I mentioned it earlier, but we are not talking about getting rid of parking in the city. That would be insane. We're talking about not mandating a minimum number of parking based on your project. And the reason we're talking about that is because parking minimums increase the costs of building, and those costs get passed down to the resident. But it also can destroy the walkability, viability, and progress of specifically your neighborhood business district. If we were to follow the current zoning code, the bottom depiction would be what would be required for parking for those 3 buildings, rather than the beautiful, dense, walkable with frankly, green space neighborhood business district on the top line. That's the goal. The top line's the goal. The bottom line, unfortunately, is the reality. We don't need to dwell on this, but there's pavement all over the city, and that a lot of people blame MSD, and there's no doubt that we have issues to fix there. But a lot of the flooding that we see is stormwater runoff, because we have these impermeable surfaces like pavement all over the city, and all of that water just kind of rushes downhill. Obviously, we have air quality issues because of a lack of landscaping and green space and hotter temperatures. This is probably my favorite fictional example. This is a neighborhood business district, and this is an issue that West Side communities face a lot. This is a historic building in our neighborhood business district. You can see this neighborhood business district looks like it's doing pretty well. They've got some new development on the right there. It looks like that building on the left across the street might have been rehabbed as well. You've got on-street parking. You've got people walking. This neighborhood business district looks like it's doing pretty well. But you also have this older building on the corner that hasn't been developed. It's got a for sale sign. Looks like there could be some housing up top and 2 vacant storefronts on the bottom. Someone wants to take this building and develop it. Well, because of our parking requirements, they'd have to demolish half the building to create parking spaces, even though there's on-street parking. And you might be asking, well, how did they get away with that in the first place? This building was built before we had these restrictive parking restrictions. And so they were able to build more tightly together in a more walkable fashion. Yeah, of course, you've now got a Queen City barbershop in there. Maybe you've got 1 housing unit, but you've taken away half of this building. And don't forget, it is cheaper and greener to rehab and maintain your buildings rather than to just demolish them and build new. This would be the ideal scenario: relaxing our parking requirements, particularly for these older buildings, so that we can maintain the housing and maintain the walkability of this community. The parking engagement was thorough. A lot of people have strong feelings on parking, but 67% of respondents support changes to parking minimums. So that was really encouraging to see. This is what we're proposing: relaxing parking requirements for new construction within 1/4 mile of neighborhood business districts, eliminating parking minimums along major corridors, and eliminating parking minimums for existing buildings. So like that example I just talked about, where that older building on the corner, eliminate parking minimums for existing renovations, existing building renovations, excuse me, and reduce residential minimums to 1 space per unit. The parking minimums conversation is can get heated, but study after study has shown that the city does not need more parking. We need more housing, and oftentimes those two things can be very mutually exclusive. Affordability. This is a huge issue for us in City Hall. How do we create more housing, but specifically, how do we create more affordable housing? And the council has said time and time again that 30% to 60% is the priority. 60% to 80% is another population of folks that we're trying to prioritize to get them into stable housing. And what you will see is that each restrictive regulation, whether it's single family or each restrictive regulation has an impact on single family development, on multifamily development. But the biggest impact is density restrictions, because it's reducing multifamily permits by 36%, which is a huge hit to our ability to create more housing. And again, similar to rents, more restrictive regulations equals less housing. I mean, restrictive regulations are intended to slow down housing and to, in some instances, deter housing creation. And of course, less housing equals higher prices. Zoning, as I've hopefully mentioned, is just one tool. If we did everything that we're proposing tomorrow, we wouldn't solve affordability, we wouldn't solve economic development, we wouldn't solve the climate issues that we're trying to solve. This is a piece of a larger plan that we need to put in place in order to create more housing over time. We've put a lot of money into affordable housing, specifically into the trust fund. The county and the city and the private sector put in excess of $100 million. And that process is working. But even if we had the most unlimited amount of gap financing, if it is illegal to build housing in parts of our city, then of course we're not going to catch up. So zoning is a critical piece of it, but it's not the only piece. Councilmember Harris led the LIHTC reform to speed up abatements. Councilmember Owens led the access to council implementation, because 60% of our citizens are renters, and Councilmember Owens is also going to expand the emergency rental assistance program that was so successful for ARP to make sure that it has a sustainable source of revenue here locally so that it lives on in perpetuity. I talked about the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. Residential tax abatement reform was a big issue we took on last year. Legalized accessory dwelling units. Earlier this year, maybe late last year, we legalized ADUs, which was our first step in this comprehensive zoning reform, creating more supply of housing. We increased our investments in our CDCs, which are trying to really support our neighborhood business districts. We've created a housing dashboard to make housing production more transparent. We've increased funding for home repair and for low and moderate income homeowners. We've been very aggressive on code enforcement, litigating to institutional investors and putting together a task force to take on other institutional investors and bad landlords. And of course, we've boosted down payment assistance for first-time home buyers. We believe that in order to really catalyze the affordable housing development in our community, we've got to incentivize it in order to prioritize it. And we think the best hook for that is LIHTC awarded projects. That's true because since 2015, LIHTC projects have contributed 1,400 units, 60% AMI or less. But the notable fact here is that is 98% of all the deeply affordable housing in the city. So if that is accounting for almost all of the deeply affordable housing in the city, then really focusing on LIHTC and giving that person trying to build housing an award for affordable development with more heights, more density, and parking bonuses, we think will be a really big carrot to spur that development. Getting close to the end here, human scale development. This is more about the look and feel of the community. Again, this is a fictional status quo picture. You got cars everywhere. It doesn't look like a safe place to walk. You've got parking in front. You can see the dumpster. There's no landscaping. There's no bus infrastructure. There's no bike infrastructure. It looks like a tough place to live. This looks better, frankly. It's the same building, but it's now walkable. It's now got landscaping. It's got bus infrastructure, bike infrastructure, EV parking infrastructure. The parking's in the back. This is what could happen with our kind of human scale development. And that's exactly what we're pursuing. We believe landscaping is important, not just for the climate impact of getting rid of that pavement, but also for people's mental health and the ability to enjoy the outside. We're going to take a look at where we're putting the dumpster, where we're putting the driveway in order to maintain walkability of our community, and also parking and bike infrastructure as well. But we're also, again, because part of Connected Community is about incentivizing and supporting our public transportation, we're going to allow property owners to place bus structures in front of their front yards in all zones. And then finally, process improvements. This is really just general cleanup, making outdoor dining approvals easier, streamlining development standards in historic districts, general cleanup. What is important to note on here, though, is that we are not changing anything as it relates to historic guidelines. We are just putting it all in one place. Some of the guidelines are in the zoning code, some of the guidelines are in the historic guidelines, and it makes it very difficult to follow. So none of that is going to change as the location is changing. I think, Catherine, were you talking about some of the administration's tools when I logged on?
Mayor, yes, we were.
Okay.
Introduced people to the website.
So I think skip some of this stuff. Catherine probably talked about it, but there's a story map on there because, again, part of this is educating, part of it is persuading. There's other information on there about all of the reforms. But what I'm really excited about is you can put in your physical address or really any address, and it'll tell you what part of Connected Communities is changing your zoning code or not. Because we're really trying to be as engaged and transparent and informative as possible. When I first started doing the slide deck, we were further on the left. This is exciting that we're getting closer to the vote. As I mentioned, this slide deck doesn't even account for the 2 years of community engagement that we did in 22 and 23. We did our announcement in kind of late January. We've been in community engagement since then, doing in-person engagement sessions. We obviously devoted the entire housing summit to that. We're going to hopefully drop our legislation sometime in the next couple of weeks. It will then go in front of the Planning Commission. If it comes out of planning, it'll then go to council for an up or down vote. Equitable Growth and Housing is going to be taking their show on the road to similar to our budget sessions to get community feedback. So we're not even finished with community feedback. After the legislation drops, we'll do another round of community feedback through EGH and then also through sessions at the Neighborhood Summit. So I know I've been talking for a while. I apologize. That's a lot of AFTAB in the morning. But if there's time, I'm happy to have a conversation about what we've just presented.
Good morning. Good morning, Mayor and everybody. This is Liz Bloom here. I am working with LISC on the webinar series. And Mayor, I have to say to you before I start questions, I have been in the planning field for a very long time in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I have never, ever heard a mayor speak as articulately as you just did about detailed zoning reform. So I must say,
I've been in a lot of sessions, so I've been educated.
I have got to give you a hearty handshake and heads up. for all of the work and the attention and the focus that you've paid to this topic. I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
It's purely amazing. So Mayor, I think that the presentation and your remarks have done a pretty good job of talking about supply and demand and how a lack of supply really does force housing cost increases. There's also a conversation that I think you've also addressed, and maybe to reiterate, zoning isn't about affordability, zoning is about product types, but
Yeah.
maybe talk a little bit more about the difference between zoning regulations and housing affordability. And I'm gonna put sort of give you a double question there, because there's also been conversation about the distribution of affordable housing
Yeah.
and how we might step away from communities where there is concentrated poverty. So it's kind of several questions in one, but if you could just spend a little bit more time there, because I know a lot of people are thinking that through as they think about their response to these zoning changes.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think where I want to start is talking about what zoning is and what it isn't. And zoning, to your point, Liz, is about what you can build where, not about what prices you're charging, not about any of that, just what you can build where. And so, so the traditional zoning question is, right, you don't want to put your sewer plant next to your elementary school, right? That's zoning in a really dumb example. But anyway, so affordability, however, is about, frankly, the market. And so there's two different ways in my mind to create affordability. You can have kind of massive subsidies to make well, you can actually just, like the federal government does, the government can build housing, but that is insanely expensive. And then you have to manage the housing. It's very, very hard for a local government to do that. So local governments are really focused on, well, how can we make it worth their while from an economic perspective in order to build more affordable units? And we do that in a number of ways. People always talk about the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. That is basically just gap financing, or filling a gap for a person who is trying to get a housing project moving and they don't have enough money for various reasons, interest rates, construction costs. So the government will provide public dollars because we have a policy incentive to create more affordable units in our city. So that's all on the market. So the kind of market, the free market kind of decides oftentimes how much housing is in a specific area. And then we try to create more affordable housing by providing them gap financing to bring more units more quickly. Where zoning comes into place, as I tried to articulate earlier, is even if I had, a lot of money on the gap financing side to bring more, to help more projects get done, if those projects are illegal based on our zoning code of where you can build what, then, of course, it doesn't matter how much money I have, I can't build anything. So that's why the zoning code, while it is not specifically about affordability, it is a tool in order to drive down those prices by allowing more different kinds of housing at different prices. So of course, a row home or a duplex or a triplex is going to be less expensive naturally than a single family home. I mean, that is just true in the same physical area, in the same neighborhood. That is just true, right? Different products come at different prices. And so if we can diversify our housing products throughout our city, not just in some neighborhoods, but throughout our city, based on our neighborhood business districts and based on our transit corridors, not based on, who we want to be winners or losers or where we think affordable housing belongs, then I think we will be on a much stronger foundation moving forward. I think it's really important for people to understand, though, that the city has very little influence about telling the private market where they should be building things. I mean, we have our zoning code that we provide, but it's really hard to tell, a person we want, this kind of apartment or this kind of housing stock in this specific neighborhood on this corner. because it's kind of up to the market to come to us and say, this is what we think we can afford and this is what we want to do. So I don't know if that answered your question, but that's kind of a generally about how this actually works and why Connected Communities is trying to make a change.
Absolutely. And maybe let me ask a follow-up, and there are several questions in the chat. I know that you've had a lot of conversations and a lot of engagement with housing professionals and developers. Talk a little bit about what you've heard from folks who are trying to create new housing, about their thoughts about the proposed changes.
Well, I mean, I think to a person, they will say it is uniquely difficult to build housing in Cincinnati. It is uniquely difficult because we have 52 neighborhoods. It's uniquely difficult because we have really engaged communities, which is all a good thing. But where it becomes a challenging thing is where those engaged communities don't agree with each other, or where they agree 1 year and then 3 years they disagree profoundly, significantly. And so that shifting dynamic, plus, you know, all the hearings that they have to go through because our zoning code is so antiquated, you know, it's a big disincentive to try and build anything in the city. And so, you know, that's what they say. I don't necessarily agree with all of that. I think an engaged community that is providing feedback obviously can make a project stronger. I think that is a strength of Cincinnati. But I do think that there are bureaucratic hurdles that don't need to be there and that we need to fix, like parking, like single family zoning, that is holding us back. And that's why we're trying to be very intentional about these reforms.
Yeah, that's perfect. Now, I know you've been pretty aggressive about institutional investors over the years during your term. Can you talk a little bit about what these regulatory changes may or may not do to the incidence of institutional investors in our communities?
Yeah, it's really hard to say. I'll be honest. I will say the more competition that we have, the less. So in other words, the more people building housing and owning housing, the less susceptible we are to these kinds of institutional investors, because they're really looking at cities that have a lot of old single family homes that are kind of past their prime. So they can prey on the owners by saying, oh, we'll give you this premium to buy this cash. Then they don't, you know, they put a fresh coat of paint, but don't actually address any structural issues, and they triple the rent overnight. And so by bringing in more competition for housing, they will not be able to get away with hiking up those rents overnight.
That's helpful. Thanks. Mary, we've got a few questions in the chat, and I'm going to ask it generally to you. I know there's been conversations over the course of this engagement around the impact on infrastructure, maybe particularly, I think, and it's been raining a lot the last couple of days, particularly about stormwater runoff and density. Maybe can you talk a little bit about that and that relationship?
I hear that all the time. Hopefully you've been mayor for 2.5 years. Hopefully people see that I speak bluntly when I can. And there's no doubt that, we have an incredibly old sewer system and we have really old infrastructure. And so we have old infrastructure problems. But too often, I think it gets blamed on the stormwater runoff that we're seeing gets blamed on our infrastructure when it's really about what we're building and the topography of our city and just how hilly and rainy our city can be. This is necessarily an effect of climate change. At our height, we were 500,000 people. Right now, we're a little over 300,000 people. So even though our infrastructure is old, it was built to maintain much more people than what we have. Every single development goes through a process by the administration to judge whether or not the traffic, the water use, the increase in people living in a specific area, what that will do to the infrastructure and whether we can maintain that infrastructure. And so none of that will change. But it is a result partly of an antiquated zoning code that we have so much stormwater runoff because we have been prioritizing pavement and cars and not prioritizing public transportation and green spaces for a very long time. Now, again, that's not going to fix it. We have to make real investments into MSD and our waterworks programs, but this will actually help those issues, not hurt it in the long run.
So this maybe leads to another sort of set of questions that I'm seeing in the chat. I greatly appreciate the connection between land use and these transportation improvements that we're talking about. I too am thrilled that issue 7 passed. I think it was a major step forward for us. And I appreciate that you said we're not eliminating parking, we're eliminating parking requirements. And I think that's an important thing for people to understand. Can we talk a little bit about the expectations that we have? And maybe this is a medium to long-term objective around people being able to use public transportation more efficiently and maybe having less need to get in their car 3 or 4 times a day, maybe just once or twice a week?
You know, look, I think I've been maybe too critical today about automobiles. There's a lot of stories in the local news today about what City Hall's doing. So I came in a little hot, but what I would say, look, I drive a car. And so, you know, I'm not hating on people who have cars. Of course, that's a vast majority of the people of Cincinnati. What we're saying is we need to start creating public transportation products that are good enough to replace our automobiles. And we're nowhere near that right now. Right now, we're really trying to focus on people who have access and the ability to take and the opportunity to take public transportation to get to and from work if owning an automobile is outside of their price range. And so the long-term goal, of course, by changing these systems is for our bus rapid transit to get so efficient and so good and so used that people start leaving their cars at home. That is a long-term vision. Of course it is. But we have to, you know, as mayor, I'm trying to make decisions that aren't just going to affect us in the next 2 years, but are going to affect us over the next 100. And if this bet on public transportation and zoning is right, then in 100 years, we will have much less reliance on cars, and that will be extraordinarily good for our environment. But you know, it's unrealistic for me to sit here and say, hey, once bus rapid transit comes, I'm not going to use my car, because I would be lying. You know, until our public transportation is as good or as efficient or as almost as close as having a car, then of course, if you can afford a car, you're going to use it. But we want to make sure that both folks who can afford a car, but also importantly, and this is generationally, the folks who don't want a car and want to rely on public transportation or want to rely on bike infrastructure or want to rely on just walking, that they have that opportunity too.
Thank you. I hope it's closer than 100 years. So I'm betting on 15 or 20.
I don't know. I'm just throwing the number out there. I don't know when it's going to happen, but hopefully it'll happen. Yeah, hopefully it'll happen.
So there's also a question, and I think it's helpful to talk about a little bit. There are planned unit development regulations in the code. There are hillside regulations in the code. The question is are these reforms going to impact those kinds of regulations?
It's a great question. That hasn't come up before. I don't think so, Catherine. I don't want to say anything wrong. So Catherine, please, if you could weigh in if you're still on.
Sure, Mayor. Yes, thank you. So Liz, that's a great question. So as you know, we have planned developments, PDs all over the city. We also have a number of overlay districts, historic districts, hillside overlay districts, urban design overlay districts. Those overlays and those planned developments still stand. So a planned development that is currently in place will still guide the development that happens on that site. Future planned developments will still guide the development that goes on that site. What we're really allowing is a little bit more flexibility on, you know, the middle housing, 2, 3, 4 families, parking, and other regulatory regulations that are in those areas, but the hillside district standards still apply. So any project that's built in the hillside district is still going to need to follow those regulations. The historic district standards still stand, And will still, any project built within a historic district is still going to need to follow the guidelines, the historic district guidelines that are in that historic district. So that's really important to understand. And then urban design overlay district, of course, as well. Urban design overlay district is, a little bit more guiding, sort of like how things are developed in our neighborhood business districts. And those guidelines still stand as well.
That's great. Thank you.
Liz,
I think
I have time for one more question, if that's okay. I'm sorry, I gotta
No,
run.
we knew you had a short time. No, that's just fine. So maybe, because you started the conversation, and I think it's a really productive connection between what connected communities is all about in terms of residential development. Do we expect that these regulations, new regulation modifications, will let us operationalize and redevelop more vacant buildings, both in business districts and all on our commercial corridors?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, those are the fictional example that I talked about being my favorite. I mean, that's, we hear it all the time on the West Side that these restrictions make it really hard to develop these vacant lots, particularly, or these, abandoned buildings, particularly in our neighborhood business district. So yeah, I mean, look, most of connected communities, the conversation at least is around housing, because that's kind of top of everybody's mind and a critical problem.
Sure.
But connected communities is also intended, because of the neighborhood business district location, is also intended to empower CDCs, empower folks like Price Hill will, empower small businesses to take control of their NBDs, to make it less expensive to develop them, and to bring more vibrancy to the area. So yeah, it's a housing, it's a public transportation, it's an economic development, and it's a climate issue. I mean, zoning impacts all of those macro issues that we care so deeply about. And I'll just end with this, Liz. Obviously I'm passionate about this, the administration's passionate about this, but the country is watching. We are starting to get some national interest and press about how we've done this, how our planning department has taken 2 years to bring us to this point, how we have iterated on other cities, and how mayors across the country, because housing is not just a Cincinnati issue, but a US issue, how mayors across the country are now prioritizing zoning. So that we have the opportunity, at least in the Midwest, to be really ahead of the curve. And I'm excited and proud that we're leading the charge. So thanks so much, guys. I really appreciate it. I will.
Thank you, Mayor. We
talk to you later.
appreciate your time. Thank you very much. So Catherine, I know we have a little bit more time on the agenda today. I'm wondering if I could ask you to talk a little bit about the research that your staff did on, back to the mayor's point, research on other communities, those folks who are out a little bit in front of us, like maybe Minneapolis, the kinds of impacts they've seen, and how you benchmarked with other communities.
Okay, Liz. So I guess what I can say sort of very generally is that we have looked at a lot of other cities and to see what they're doing, because as the mayor just said, we are not the only city in the country who's trying to crack this nut. Really, planners across the country and the American Planning Association has made a lot of resources available to cities to really help people try to figure out how to encourage more housing development and incorporate more middle housing into our cities, especially when in cities like Cincinnati, middle housing is especially the 2s, 3s, and 4 families is kind of a product that naturally exists in most of our neighborhoods, and that many of us have our own streets. And so how do we how do we get from a place where those are no longer permitted to a place where those are permitted and encouraged? So we took advantage of all of the research that's out there, and really we looked through a lot. I'm going to be honest, we looked through a lot. And on our website, I'm hoping to drop this into the chat for everyone. I keep going to the wrong place. On our website, there is a and I apologize for not looking at the camera. Trying to copy and drop in here.
Multitasking online is no easy task, Catherine. Do what you need.
I'm just grateful we can do it. I'm dropping this in here for everyone. What we had showed you before was a oh shoot, sorry, that was the wrong one. those are some of our materials that I just dropped in right now. What I'm dropping right now is this is a different connected communities link than what we sent you earlier. What we sent you to earlier was to our sort of more up-to-date webpage. This is sort of our original
Great.
webpage. And if you look at it on the left-hand side, you'll see a section that says additional resources, and it takes you to a Google Drive. And that's why I didn't want to post just the Google Drive into the chat, because I thought it was
Sure.
complicated. But it links to a ton of research that we've done throughout this process. And I think what's really important to note is that there is no one best way to do this. That's really what we learned, is that different cities are trying it in different ways that they think work for them. And so we in Cincinnati recognize that that's what we need to do here. We need to do what we think works best for Cincinnati. Just because it works for Minneapolis, just because it works for, you know, some other city, it does not necessarily mean that it's going to work for us in the same way. You know, Raleigh's had some great success. But I think that, you know, what we really did is we relied a lot on our conversations with our professional stakeholders. So those are the folks who are developing housing, whether it's market rate or affordable, people who are designing housing, architects, people who are funding housing, advocating for housing,
Right.
nonprofits, people who are trying to revitalize our business districts. We talk to them to say, what are Cincinnati's specific needs? What in our zoning code is preventing housing production? And then we also, as the mayor said, really deeply engaged the community. And what we heard from really everyone, including the professional stakeholders and the community, is that they didn't feel that a citywide recommendation was appropriate for Cincinnati. And we kind of used Plan Cincinnati as a little bit of our guide to help us sort of understand that building in the relaxation of these regulations around our neighborhood business districts and along our transit corridors is what people felt comfortable with, what people felt made sense from a strategic perspective in Cincinnati, and also would, you know, meet the other goals that we had in Plan Cincinnati, which was to support and stabilize our neighborhood business districts, increase our transit opportunities, and really help support transit out there. So I don't know if I exactly answered your question, because you wanted me to talk a little bit more in depth about the research, but I think the important part is that the research that we did really guided us to help us understand that we needed to design a product that worked for Cincinnati.
No, I appreciate that. And I think that you guys have done a great job of really paying attention to what community folks have said over the course of the engagement, because zoning is a local issue. But I also appreciate the consideration of other national topics. So Valerie, there are several requests in the chat to make sure that the mayor's PowerPoint gets shared. And I'm going to answer for Lisk and say, I think that we'll have this webinar up. And when we do, the mayor's website will be available on Lisk's website. If I'm speaking out of turn, please somebody correct me.
We're going to work with the mayor's office to see if that's possible. Yes, Liz.
Great, thanks. Yeah, so folks, look at Lisk's website in the next couple of days to have that available. So I'm going to, at this point, I think there have been lots of questions we've responded to. I apologize if there are questions in the chat that we didn't get to today. I want to thank, I must say again, that our mayor is truly versed in this topic, and I really appreciate his attention to this issue. Again, the planning department, Catherine, you and Andrew and Stacy and your whole staff has just been done a great job of bringing this issue to the fore for all of us. So thanks. I think, Kristen, I'm going to throw it back to you at this point to take us home.
Great. Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Mayor Aftab, and the entire community planning team here for sharing all of this really detailed information with our audience today. As Liz mentioned, this will all be available on our website earlier mid next week, let's say. And we really hope you'll join us for our next Housing Our Future webinar, which will be upcoming in the next couple of weeks. We'll have more to share. So thank you so much for joining us today, and have a good afternoon.